How many times can you erase yourself before there's nothing left to return to? Welcome to Seeker Soliloquy, a space for those navigating the line between who they are and who the world expects them to be. I'm your host, the Omniversal Seeker, here to explore what lies beneath the masks we wear and what it means to remember ourselves. This episode is for the ones who changed their names so they'd be easier to pronounce, who left their language at the door of the classroom, who muted their flavors, their music, their laughter, their mother's rituals, just to survive. Because in many immigrant and marginalized communities, survival has a price, and too often, that price is the self. At first, it seems harmless. You mirror the way they speak, you dress like them, you downplay your background to avoid uncomfortable questions. You're not being fake, you're protecting yourself. But somewhere along the way, what started as camouflage becomes identity. You forget the name you were first called. You stopped craving the foods you loved. You flinch at your parents' accents. And that mask, the one you once wore only when needed, now clings so tightly it starts to feel like skin. So ask yourself, gently, what parts of your culture have you silenced to fit in? And who were you before you became acceptable? Internal family systems teach us that we're not one unified self, but a family of parts. Some of these parts are exiles, the younger, more tender selves who carry grief, fear, or shame. Others are protectors, older, tougher parts who step in to keep the pain locked away. In immigrant or marginalized lives, this system becomes especially pronounced. The child who's mocked for their lunch or their traditions becomes an exile. And the adult who overachieves, over-assimilates, or overperforms becomes the protector. They're not cruel, just desperate to keep the exile safe. If you've ever been told yourself to be less loud, less foreign, less emotional, which part of you was speaking, and which part was hiding? Try whispering this to the part that hides. You are not too much. You are a memory worth keeping. Let's explore this topic through 3 characters from the Black Panther universe. 3 different ways to respond to exile, legacy, and belonging. First, there's Killmonger, a child left behind. He was cut off from his homeland, from his history, from any sense of inheritance, so he forged his identity in rage. His protector became his personality. The pain of abandonment turned into a fire he couldn't put out. Bury me in the ocean with my ancestors that jumped from ships, 'cause they knew death was better than bondage. This line isn't just defiance, it's grief. The kind that comes from never having a place to return to. And if you've ever felt like your roots were stolen from you, if you've ever felt more anger than grief because grief is too tender to hold, maybe there's an exile in you, still waiting to be seen. You might ask yourself, what protector did I become so I wouldn't feel abandoned again? What grief have I armored myself against? And gently affirm yourself, I am allowed to grieve what was taken from me. I do not need to become hard to be whole. Now let's shift to T'Challa, who had it all and still couldn't see what was missing. He inherited his homeland, his language, his throne, but he was taught to guard it, not share it. He was told that the only way to keep culture alive was to build a wall around it. And while boundaries can protect, they can also isolate. In psychology, this is called rigid boundaries, ones so thick that even love and transformation can't get through. Many of us were raised with this kind of boundary. Don't trust outsiders. Don't change what's sacred. Don't let them see you cry. But when boundaries become barricades, we cut ourselves off not just from danger, but from connection. So pause and ask, which of my boundaries are protecting me, and which are keeping me alone? What would it look like to have a boundary that breathes? Here's a hint. Look at porous boundaries and balance both types. You can say this to your guarded self. I am safe enough now to open up a little. My truth does not need to be hidden to be honored. And then there's Nakia. She walks between worlds. She doesn't hoard her culture or weaponize it. She embodies it. She helps without losing herself. She adapts without erasing. This is what integration looks like. She is the self in IFS, the calm, compassionate, curious part of us that holds space for all our parts, not just the proud ones, not just the wounded ones. And that's the goal of healing, not to choose between our histories and our futures, but to braid them together into something new. If you've ever felt torn between your family and your freedom, between tradition and transformation, you might be standing at the door of integration. You might try asking yourself, what would it look like to stop choosing and start weaving? What would it mean to let all of me exist in one place? And remind yourself, I do not need to choose between who I was and who I'm becoming. My culture is not a costume. It is a living memory I carry forward. Culture doesn't disappear all at once. It fades slowly in the silence of the classroom where your name is mispronounced, in the awkward laugh when your parents speak too loudly in public, in the lunch that smells too foreign, the clothing that looks too colorful, the stories that seem too spiritual. Assimilation tells you that the more you erase, the more you'll be accepted. But what it doesn't say is this: when the individual forgets, the collective begins to dissolve. For many immigrant and marginalized people, erasure was the cost of safety. But we are allowed to rewrite that contract. We are allowed to remember. We are allowed to reclaim. We are allowed to be both the keeper of the story and the author of its next chapter. You are not meant to shrink to survive. That was something your nervous system learned in order to stay safe. But shrinking is not the same as healing. Belonging is not something you earn by becoming smaller. It's something you build by becoming whole. You don't have to wait for permission. So if this episode touched something in you, let this be your invitation to speak the words you haven't spoken in years, to cook the dish you were once ashamed to bring to school, to ask your elders the questions you were too afraid to voice, and to remind every part of you, especially the one that still thinks it's too much, I am allowed to take up space. I belong, not in spite of my difference, but because of it. I carry my ancestors in my voice, in my choices, in my becoming. Until next time, keep seeking, and remember, the more of yourself you reclaim, the more you restore what the world was never meant to lose.